Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Fantasy 420, where today we are going to be returning to the hardwood and discussing some free agent pickups I like for Week 20 in the 2019 Fantasy NBA season. With your playoffs coming up, it's going to be really important for us to discuss which playoff weeks teams play the most amount of games. So, depending on where you are in your standings, you can adjust your roster according to that. So obviously the first week of the fantasy playoff season is going to be week 22. And there are only two teams that play two games, and those being the Golden State Warriors and the Memphis Grizzlies. So if you're a fringe playoff team and your playoff trade deadline hasn't come yet, then you might want to look to capitalize on maybe trading a Warriors star to get a bunch in return so you can make it out of the first round, or maybe look to trading a Grizzly or two. I doubt you'll be able to get as much for them, but if you're looking at a team who's looking to make the playoffs or a fringe team, then that 2 games isn't really going to be helping you in the first round. So that's something to look into. Obviously, the next round would be week 23. The Nets and the Magic play 2 games in that round. So if you found yourself in a first round bye or a good situation, maybe you can sell a Nick Vucevic, capitalize on him as that team is surging now down the stretch. The Nets, you could also maybe capitalize on a couple of their players, but it's just important to look forward to these weeks, see where your team's at, maybe trade some of those guys. A couple of the free agents I'm looking at, you might want to prioritize other ones over them now because they'll be playing more games. And that's a simple Google search for fantasy playoff schedule, and you can see which players have which amount of games in these final 3 weeks. And in the final week, your championship week, is the only team with 2 games is the New York Knicks. So you might want to sell on a DSJ high right now. That would be a really good idea. Or not buy into the free agents who are coming from the Knicks in that championship week. So that being said, we're going to move on to the 5 guys I really like who are less than 50% owned in your Yahoo leagues. The first name being Damian Dotson. He's a shooting guard for the New York Knicks, and he's around 20% owned. So once again, if you're a great team, you might want to skip past him as he has 2 games only in that championship week. But I think he is a very good source of fantasy points right now and for the future in the Knicks offense. Fizdale had an extremely complimentary post-game speech, including Dotson last game, and he had various parts of his game which he included to Klay Thompson. So that's obviously very high praise. So he might, and I anticipate him to see a lot of minutes going forward. That offense obviously in flux after the Smiths trade, so they're trying to figure out who he likes and how many minutes he's going to allocate to who. He's averaged around 30 minutes since that Dennis Smith trade. He just had his best game of the season with 37 minutes, 24 points scored, and 39 overall fantasy points. 39 overall fantasy points. So that's obviously really good. He's trending up. He's on a bad team. He's going to see a lot of minutes. So you might want to ride him while he's hot and see what it's looking like going forward, because it might be worth it. Another name I like, this is a second time mention for him, but Robin Lopez, center for the Bulls. Another bad team. He's around 28% owned. Actually, all these players are on poor teams. He's at 4 games with around 30 minutes each and 30 fantasy points, and that's pretty good consistency. And the reason I've mentioned him again and why I mentioned him last time is I just don't see that decreasing. He's a rotational piece on a really bad team that should be tanking for that high-end lottery pick. So I think he will see minutes. He's just a 14-year journeyman. While they're going to rest their starters, who are a lot younger, who have a bright future, and they don't want to hurt for next year. Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, Lauri Markkanen, Otto Porter, etc. All these guys are really important to their future. So they'll probably just play Lopez a steady diet of minutes towards the end of the season, because there's really no reason not to, and he should see some productive games. So I really like him on any team, and I just expect that to go up. He might even be a 10-team leaguer guy. So another name I've liked is Tyler Johnson. He was traded to the Phoenix Suns before the deadline. He's around 32% owned. Once again, he's on a bad team, a rotational piece. They traded for him late, so they want to see what they have with him and how he meshes with their future going forward. He's had around 30 minutes over their last 5 games, which is post-trade. He's just like Dotson, coming off his best game of the year. 35 minutes, 29 points, 50 fantasy points. That's pretty good. They have needed a point guard in their lineup. They are done rotating Oubre, trying him at point guard, Josh Jackson. They want Booker and or Tyler Johnson on the floor at the same time. And really, who knows how long Devin Booker is going to be healthy for. He's probably the most injured, oft-injured player in the league. So once again, if they decide to sit him going forward, then man, Johnson could see high-end 30s minutes, and that would give you some really nice production. I just also going to sit other players over him, just like Lopez. With Warren, they know what they have in him. Oubre, they have a lot more time with him than Johnson. Same with Josh Jackson, like I mentioned. They're just going to play Johnson and see what they have with his minutes going forward to the end of the year. Another name I don't like as much as the other 3 guys, but he's been on such a heater, I have to mention him, is Joakim Noah. He's on the Memphis Grizzlies now. If you didn't know, he's sort of bounced around. 24% owned, which has really jumped up. Last week it was at around like 4 or less. He's more of a weekly play, but with Josh Jackson Jr. being injured without a timetable, and as much as a heater he's been on, you have to mention him in one of these lists in a standard or regular league in general. He has 3 38-plus point fantasy point games over his last 5 games, and almost most importantly, there's been 4 losses for the Grizzlies in those games. So they're a team, like I said, tanking for that number 1/high-end lottery pick, and he could be a main piece of that tank going forward. If they're losing games, they'll just play him, say he's doing really well, and they're, not trying to lose games, not trying to get Josh Jackson hurt forward, going forward more, various reasons, but he could be a great piece of that tank as they're trying to get a really high pick, and I could definitely see him as a main piece going forward. And if he gets more minutes and consistent minutes, then he could jump to the number 1 person on this list very easily, because those fantasy point games were at around 20 to 25 minutes. He's just been very efficient and on so much of a heater. The last name I'm going to mention really quick, he's on a bad team. They're in the 9th spot in the East Division, but DJ Augustine, he's the 42% owned right now. But Orlando is trying to make the playoffs with Gordon, Vucevic, and prove to their franchise that they're a team on the rise going forward, which I've sort of mentioned. Orlando has won 6 of their last 7, and they are 1 game out of the 8 seed. He's had over 25 minutes in 4 of those last 7 games, and he's averaged around 25 fantasy points per game in that 4. So I could kind of see him as a guy where they ratchet up the rotation, and he sees more minutes as less players play, and the fantasy points would obviously rise a little bit, and he would benefit from a playoff stretch run for that team. And he has a lot of room to grow in upside with minutes and thus fantasy points, and I could see him providing a lot of value moving forward. That was the last name I wanted to feature and mention. I've already mentioned Collin Sexton. He's still 49% owned. He's a must-own, I feel, right now. Cedi Osman, same, 43% owned. Kevin Knox, 42% owned, but that being said, he's very inconsistent, and he has those 2 games at the end of the year. I've mentioned those guys 2 or 3 times right now, so that's all I'm going to say. But with Knox, I would obviously put him below those guys, but he's still a young player. He's going to see a lot of minutes on a bad team, so he's still worth it if your league is deep enough. But anyway, guys, I will see you tomorrow with another video. It was a pleasure, and take it easy.